Welcome or welcome again to the First Unitarian Church. Some of you all were here for the meditation that Dr. Tuttle led earlier, and some of you are just arriving now. We're so glad to be together for this time to hear Dr. Tuttle. My name is Stephen Storla. I'm a member of this church and of the church's animal ministry. Our animal ministry respects other species as fellow sentient beings who deserve rights. You can chat with our members after the presentation in the reception, which will be in the room right outside the hallway. We're pleased to co-host this presentation with Northwest Veg and with Dharma Voices for Animals. Now I'll turn the mic over to Jaclyn Leeds, Executive Director of Northwest Veg. She does so much for our community. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you so much for being here. It's so nice to see the room full. Thank you to Stephen and to Keith and the UU Animal Ministry and to Christopher and Dharma Voices for Animals for inviting us to co-sponsor this evening. The title of this talk, Social Justice, Revealing Hidden Connections, is perfectly aligned with the mission of Northwest Veg, which is to educate and encourage people to make vegan choices for a compassionate, sustainable, and healthy future. So Northwest Veg approaches our mission from 4 perspectives: improving the health and well-being for animals, for our planet, for the humans implicated in our food systems, and for our own health. And so the work that Dr. Will Tuttle does in looking at social justice and the intersection of these 4 things is just perfect with the work that we do as an organization. Dr. Will Tuttle is a visionary author and inspirational speaker, as you'll hear. He's presented widely throughout most of the globe. He's the acclaimed Amazon #1 bestseller of the World Peace Diet. He's been an activist and a vegan for 38 years. He's the recipient of the Courage of Conscience Award and the Empty Cages Award. He holds his PhD from UC Berkeley, focusing on educating intuition and altruism. He's the creator of the World Peace Diet training programs. He's taught college courses in philosophy, humanities, and comparative religion. He's a former Zen monk and Dharma Master in the Korean Zen tradition. He's the co-founder of the Worldwide Prayer Circle for Animals. And he's currently conducting a music, art, and education ministry with his spouse, Madeline, who is a visionary artist from Switzerland, specializing in painting, which you can see these beautiful paintings on the screen and around us that celebrate the beauty of animals and nature. And Madeline is also accomplished as a flautist, a Waldorf teacher, a vegan cooking coach, an organic gardener and artisan. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Will Tuttle.
Thank you, Jaclyn. All right. Thank you so much, Jaclyn and Stephen. Let's give a big hand to Keith and to everybody who helped organize this event. It's been a lot of work that's gone into this, so thank you, everyone, really. It's great to be here in Portland, and let's just give a hand to Madeline, too. She's the artist, and she's right here, and a big part of the ministry, so thank you. Thank you, Madeline. All right. So, yes, so let's jump right in here. I'd like to thank the folks who came a little early. At 6 o'clock, we had a meditation on the 4 Viharas. And I think the basic thing that has pulled us here is really the essence of that meditation, and also, I think, of the animal liberation movement, which is caring, the idea and the feeling in our hearts of caring for someone outside of just ourselves. And so I know that if you found your way here, you have something that we all share. We all have something that we share in common, which is this feeling of caring for animals, caring for ecosystems, caring for other human beings, so that we can create contexts of relating to each other that are harmonious, caring for future generations, and really caring for ourselves, actually, for the unique and beautiful beings that each one of us are. That this feeling of caring, and I think the deep wisdom of caring is something that is repressed in our culture, primarily because of the fact that we live in a society which is organized at its living core around owning animals as property for food. And this is invisible, essentially. And so that's the discovery, I think, one of the discoveries anyway, that I think helps all of us to become agents of positive change by working on not only our own consciousness, but hopefully through that, helping to share a way of seeing that is more inclusive and includes all living beings. That's the basic idea. So I just want to, before I jump in here, mention what we have in the background going on here. How many of you have actually read the World Peace Diet? That's sort of the primary text. So quite a few of you have, quite a few of you haven't. So this is the kind of the source of a lot of the ideas that I'll be speaking about today. We just published pretty recently, a couple of years ago, the 10th anniversary edition. The World Peace Diet has been translated into 16 languages, and there's about, I think, 8 or 10 more coming out in the next year or so. And so that has been really a fantastic thing in the sense that we are now, for the last few years, getting invited to countries all over the world to bring this message. And I just want to say, if you don't like listening to me, look at the paintings, because I think they're more articulate than anyone probably can ever be. But as I was saying, so as we're now traveling globally, I have a feeling at this point that maybe I have a sense better than anyone really of what the global vegan movement is like, just because we've been to Africa and all over Asia and all over Europe and North and South America and so forth, and Australia, New Zealand. We haven't been to the Antarctica yet, and we haven't talked to the penguins, but I don't. That's probably a lost cause. But I think in general, it's just wonderful to go and see, and I want to report that back to everyone that when we gather like this in Portland, and Portland is considered one of the hotbeds of vegan activism in North America, but there's lots of these hotbeds actually, even in unlikely places in South Africa or Dubai. I mean, there's lots of people working hard in creating vegan meetup groups and creating vegan sanctuaries that exist, of course, as you know, if you've been. How many of you have been to a sanctuary, animal sanctuary? Some of you? Yeah, a lot of you have. Okay, so these are wonderful educational places where we show and demonstrate, by example, caring for animals. There's a wonderful one not too far from here, Lighthouse Sanctuary. And so people are doing this, creating vegan, all kinds of cooking classes and veg fests everywhere, even in China, Taiwan, Korea, Vietnam, and so forth. So there's a very rich and varied vegan movement that is, I think, in many ways exploding, and it's, in a lot of ways, it's under the radar. It's not really it's being covered somewhat, but it's wonderful to see that. So this is the book that I think covers a lot of the ideas that I'll be talking about at a deeper level. And then this one, Circles of Compassion, Essays Connecting Issues of Justice, came out much more recently, just a few years ago. And I am the editor. I kind of got everybody together. There's 29 other authors that I chose. All of them are vegans, and all of them are experts in a particular field of social justice, racism or sexism or heterosexism or ableism or classism, whatever. These different, and the thing though is the basic idea is to see the interconnectedness in the deep structure of consciousness in our society, and how the underlying attitude of speciesism, I have a word which I call herderism, which I think in some ways is more accurate, but this idea that human beings are inherently superior to animals, that we are entitled to use them however we want, that fundamental idea that leads to enormous suffering to animals, how that is connected in many ways to these social justice issues in ways that nobody's really talking about too much. So it's been really great to see how popular, in a sense, and well-respected this book has become over the last couple of years, because it I think, illuminates a lot of these hidden connections. So I will be talking about that as well. And then just to let you know, we do have a new book that just came out last year called Your Inner Islands, The Keys to Intuitive Living. And to me, this is an important aspect of the whole thing, too. My PhD at Berkeley focused on educating intuition in adults, and I think, essentially, it's wonderful that we human beings have a capacity of logic and rationality and intellect and analysis and so forth, and it's very important that we develop these skills and not let them be suppressed, which they are, unfortunately, a lot in our society. But there's another aspect of our consciousness that's also repressed, even more violently, I would say, than logic, and that is what I refer to as intuition, which is an internal guidance system that I think we all have when we quiet our mind and learn to become more open and receptive. This is a more feminine capacity, in a sense. I think we all have the masculine and feminine capacities, but this feminine capacity of intuition is, I think, very powerful, because I think we all know in our bones that the greatest friend we have in our life is an inner guidance system, an inner knowing that can help us to live our unique life and not just be, in a sense, propelled through our life by all the inner stories that have been planted into us, the inner narratives that have been planted into us by very well-meaning people, our parents, our teachers, our ministers, not this minister, but the other ministers, and all the advertising on TV and the doctors and the government officials. All of us are like little sponges. We're born into this world, and we learn their language becomes my language, their food becomes my food, their way of thinking and attitudes become my way of thinking and attitudes. And this happens. And so if we're not careful, we become pretty robotic and just sort of go along, because we've internalized so much, and so we the aspirations that we have and the image that we want to have and all of that it propels us into a certain life. And so I think it's very important that each one of us, if we can, take time every day to take a time out and enter the silence, so that we can connect with consciousness that is unconditioned, in a sense, within us, and get guidance each day to live our unique life. Because it doesn't mean, if we're living our own unique life, doesn't mean our life will be easy, but it does mean it's our life. And there's something inherently satisfying and joy-invoking and gratitude-producing when we're living our life, and we get up in the morning and we think, gosh, I got another day to do the best I can to learn and grow and contribute the unique piece to this big puzzle we have here, that we're trying to figure out how we can live our lives on this earth the way we're intended to, rather than destroy everything and each other's possibilities. So this book has quite a few meditation exercises and teachings, primarily from Asia, but also from Western traditions as well, if you want to go more deeply into that. And then the final thing I'll just mention, we only have one left because we're at the end of our tour, but this is sheet music and art. If you want to play some of I have people that asked me for the last 20 years if I would please make a book of sheet music for my piano composition. So there's 15. Beth helped, thank you very much, with some of the graphics. And Madeline's 25 of her paintings are in here too. So I'd like to go ahead and just say now what will be the foundation of the talk, which is what I mentioned briefly already, which is that we are all born into a culture that's organized at its core, at its living core, around herding animals, around owning animals as property for food. This is something that we don't teach our children, that we don't think of ourselves. How many of you are even aware of that? I know it took me 20 years to suddenly realize the enormous significance of this, because we're taught and we believe and so forth that we live in a sort of, whatever it is, a kind of post-modern, industrial, computerized society. However, that's not true. I mean, we live essentially in a herding society. It's organized around owning animals as property for food, even though we're not personally, like perhaps long ago and far away people did, have a staff and be poking the sheep and the goats around. It's all industrialized and computerized, and the cows and sheep and pigs and turkeys and ducks and geese and chickens and so forth are all stuck away in these stinking sheds where they never see the light of day, until perhaps one fateful day when they're taken out and killed. But this is a massive operation, and it defines our society completely. We have to understand this. It defines our society not only in the outer world, which I'll talk just a little bit about, but in the inner world as well. And that's where it's so connected to social justice issues, equality issues, and essentially, I think, the institutions in our society are all molded by this at a very deep level. So the basic sense I have is I'd like to talk for about just maybe 30 to 45 minutes, not go on too long here, and then we'll open it up for some questions. So it's a lot to cover. But one of the main ideas that is very critical to understand is just the historical perspective. So very briefly, what this is essentially that about 10,000 years ago, and there's really broad agreement about this, anthropologists don't argue about this, about 10,000 years ago, as far as we can tell, people in what is the eastern Mediterranean region of Iraq, sort of northeastern Iraq, seems to be the first place that people started owning animals as property for food, herding them. It was wild sheep, wild goats, shortly after, about 2,000 years later, wild cows, and this, from my point of view, really changed our human beings and our culture dramatically, the herding revolution. And it did 5 or 6 primary things that we still see happening. And the first and foremost, most obvious one is that animals were reduced. And remember, this was a slow revolution. It took probably many centuries, thousands of years. Very gradually this happened. And so animals who, it's pretty well, again, agreed upon that animals, non-human animals, were looked upon by people prior to the herding revolution with a lot of respect. Animals have enormous capacity. I mean, even I am amazed today, even by squirrels and mice, much less all these birds migrating, and the way they're just so capable. Anyway, people have had a sense of respect for animals, and they were considered mysterious and powerful cohabitants of the earth with us. But with the herding revolution, once you start owning a being as property, then their status really just tanks. It's like you pig, turkey, chicken, you cow. You can't get more disrespected than these animals, and because we're harming them. We all know this, so I don't have to tell you. When we enslave people or when we have enemies that we have to harm, we have to reduce them. So animals were reduced, and not just the animals we're imprisoning, but basically all animals in general, because even the free-living wild animals are now threats to our property. They may somehow interfere and harm, so we want to get rid of the prairie dogs, coyotes, bobcats, mountain lions, bears, crows. I mean, pretty much all animals have become an enemy. And Oregon, I mean, gosh, this is one of the worst places. I mean, the whole country is, but the USDA's Wildlife Services is literally using our taxpayer money to kill millions and millions of animals. Excuse me. So the basic idea is that, number one, animals are reduced, and we see this today. There's really a war against animals, and unfortunately, they're going extinct very rapidly because of habitat destruction and just being killed off and hunted. Number two, for the very first time, we had the arising of a wealthy elite class. And this has enormous implications. And I'll just say briefly, there had never been this wealthy elite class before. But once you have people, these civilizations that are amassing large quantities of livestock, you have this accumulation by some people, some men, being much higher on the social hierarchy. And I used to teach college courses in the very oldest writings, the very first texts that ever appeared on planet Earth, the ancient Epic of Gilgamesh, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the ancient Old Testament writings, the ancient Greek tragedies, and these ancient works that go back about 3,500 years. By then, you can just read about it. It's in the books, right? You can see there's these kings, and they're kings, and they're powerful and wealthy, and they control all the institutions in the society. And why are they so wealthy and powerful? It's because they own livestock, capital. The ancient word capita in Latin means head, as in head of sheep and goats and so forth. So this is this proto-capitalist system where the wealthy elite own the means of production of wealth. And this wealthy elite class, unfortunately, learned that they could get rich very quickly by taking the wealth, which was livestock, of other king, of the neighbor king, right? So for the very first time, not only do we have this wealthy elite class, but they give rise to two more institutions which are still with us today, which are having an enormous detrimental effect. One is the institution of war. War is still with us, more than ever in some ways. And so the very oldest word we know on planet Earth for war is the ancient word gavya, which literally means the desire for more cows. That's the first word for war, because these wealthy elite would see somebody and they want those cows, because that's wealth. So they would, for the very first time, we had these large-scale conflicts, thousands of men fighting each other over livestock, basically. And whoever lost the war, you did not want to lose a war back then because the consequences were horrific. Not only did the livestock become the property of the victors, but the human beings became the property of the victors. So we had slavery, and slavery is still alive and well on this planet. And it's, in fact, a lot of statistics say there's more slavery today than there was in 1865. So it's important to realize that war and slavery and the wealthy elite class are all a direct result of animal agriculture. Social justice issues are enormously, these are huge social justice issues, and animal agriculture is at the core and driving force of this, because it's about owning livestock. The ranchers, essentially, back then, the kings, had been running things. And when they came over here, the big ranchos and everything, it was the ownership of land and water and livestock, and that was wealth and power, and they made the laws then, and they still make the laws today. So these four things are very important to understand, and one of the things I noticed also in my research is that whatever we have done to animals, sooner or later, we do it to each other. So it's a small step, actually, from owning animals as property to owning human beings as property. And everything else. I won't go into it, but there's all the, unfortunately, the general list of atrocities that are committed on animals, sooner or later we're doing it to each other. So it's very sobering to understand that, and it's another reason we need to understand that animal agriculture will destroy us if we don't evolve out of this. Two more important aspects of this, the final two. One is basically the role of women. Because what animal agriculture is essentially, it's two things. It's not one thing. People think animal agriculture is just killing animals for food. You can't kill the animals for food without the other thing, number two, which is breeding them. You got to continually breed. And the more you breed, the better, right? Because these are animals that the more you have, the wealthier you are. But the more you have, the more land you need, the more water you need. So it's this expansionistic, it's just inherent. I used to teach college courses in Plato, in Socrates Says in the Republic, and if we want more cows, if we want more livestock, we'll have to go to war. And they said, sure, we will. Now, this has been well understood for thousands of years. So, but the thing is, we have to understand, what does this mean for women? Women also were respected because they did something that men can't do, bringing forth new life. But animal agriculture degrades the status of the female giving birth, because to a herder, a female is just a breeder. She's just here to give me what I want. She's just here to give me what I want: sons, pleasure, wealth, and so forth. So you can read in these ancient texts, the very oldest text, we got these kings in place. They're always going to war. They got all these slaves, and women are bought and sold just like chattel property, because they don't have any status because of animal agriculture. And then the final thing is the boys. The boys are also wounded. They have to basically have their natural sensitivity and tenderness and gentleness forcefully shut down so they can be hard and tough and capable of violence against rival herders and against women and against animals. And so we have the arising of this role model of the hard, tough, disconnected male, the John Wayne macho kind of cowboy mentality, which is devastating. There's probably no more devastating force on planet Earth than that force of hard, tough, disconnected males. And so this is what animal agriculture requires. It has from the very beginning. So we have to get very clear about this and to just see that culture that emerged in the Eastern Mediterranean 10,000 years ago and gradually spread, essentially, it's spread, that's the thing, and it's spread throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, into the Northern Mediterranean, into Central Asia, into Europe, And it didn't stop there. Of course, they eventually came over to North and South America and spread to Asia and Africa. And they brought this whole thing with them. They didn't just come by themselves. They brought what the Native American Indians call their slave animals with them, and the whole mentality of domination and exploitation of animals. And so it's spreading still today. We see it. We were just in Africa. I won't go into it. I mean, it's wonderful to go to Africa and see the vegan movement, but it's really heartbreaking to see how the animals in Africa are being completely wiped out. The wild animals because Kentucky Fried Chicken and Burger King and McDonald's are moving in, and so now these animals, the zebras and the giraffes and the lions and all these animals are now their enemies. They want to get rid of them. The elephants, kill the elephants. They're interfering with our livestock. They're interfering with our fields. We want to kill them. So this war against animals, we can see it very clearly, and there's very little hope for these animals if we're going to continue with livestock. But the point is that that culture, that herding culture, is spreading today through the institutions we have today, through Kentucky Fried Chicken, Burger King, McDonald's, ConAgra, Cargill, Monsanto, and the World Bank and the IMF and the USAID and all these governmental, corporate, financial programs are all rooted in this. I call the whole thing the military, industrial, meat, medical, pharmaceutical, media, banking complex. Right? We have this complex, and it works very well to do what it's supposed to do. And what it's supposed to do is basically take 99% of the wealth and put it in the pockets of 1% of the people, or 1/10 of 1% of the people. It works very well to do that. That's what it's designed to do. So we have to understand that animal agriculture is where it gets its talons into us, into people and into ecosystems and so forth. It's through the activity of animal agriculture, the exploitive nature of exploiting and owning and enslaving animals by the billions, and dominating and exploiting ecosystems by the billions, and dominating and exploiting human beings by the billions. That's what animal agriculture is. And as long as anyone is taking out their wallet and paying for meat, dairy products, and eggs, we're not just exploiting animals, we're also being exploited. There's no question about it. Anyone who's eating animal foods is being exploited. This is not a behavior that anyone arrived at on our own. So it's very important, I think, to understand that all of us have been, in a sense, wounded by being born into this modern version of the ancient herding culture that's now a high-tech herding culture. The revolutions that we talk about, like the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution and the communication revolutions, were not revolutions in the sense they didn't change anything at a deep level. We can kill and eat more animals faster than ever. But the herding revolution really did change everything. And so what I think we're working for now, what we're dedicated to, is a revolution or an evolution, a benevolent evolution beyond herderism. The herding mentality and what herderism is completely toxic. There's nothing in it that can help us. It destroys and erodes all dimensions of our health as individuals, as a society, ecosystem, psychologically, spiritually, ethically, on every level, because it's based on violence and abuse and exploitation and oppression of other beings. And yet it's somehow portrayed to us as some kind of nice thing, right? I remember growing up, and it was like the hamburgers and the hot dogs, those are my friends. They're delicious and nutritious. That's how I get my protein, and the cheese and the milk and the eggs. That's how I get my calcium and all the things I need. And so really we have to understand that these narratives are completely false, and they're not only exploiting animals, and I would not have to explain this to you if you were cows and pigs and chickens, right? This would be very obvious. But since we're born in the entitled level of human beings, we don't realize not only how our system is devastating them, but how it wounds all of us. So the basic idea is that when we're sitting around the table from the time we're little kids and we're eating meat, dairy products, and eggs as a regular ritual in our family, we're not just eating foods that are actually quite toxic, and we can get into that a little bit. That's not the main focus here. But what is the focus is that we're not, besides eating foods that are toxic, we're eating attitudes that are toxic. But we don't know that. We think they're invisible. The whole thing is invisible. It's ritualized, so it's invisible. And so it's important to understand. I have a PhD in education, and one of the things that that we understand in education, although it's not really discussed that much, is that there's at least two levels of going on in a classroom at any point. There's the learning of content, which is like we're teaching geography or we're teaching mathematics, so we're teaching the kind of material that we test the students on, right? We test them on whether they really learned it. But there's a deeper level always going on, which you never test anybody on. It's called the paradigmatic level. Students in school are learning the underlying paradigm, the underlying pattern of relationships in our society. What I'm learning when I'm in school is that I have to compete with other students for a limited number of high grades. That I have to bend my will to authoritarian power structures. This is what we don't test anybody on, but this is what we really learn and we never forget. This is what gets internalized. It's the same thing with food, and this is important to understand this. It's like cultures really only do one thing, essentially. Cultures transmit their values and norms, traditions, and so forth from generation to generation. So every culture does that. There's no cultures that don't do that. So don't think you can ever have a situation where we're not being programmed and indoctrinated. We're all going to be programmed and indoctrinated, whether we're born here or in the Amazon or an Eskimo village or wherever it is. So that's the thing. We're always being indoctrinated, but what is the quality of the indoctrination? What is the actual thing? See, anthropologists understand that the primary way that any culture transmits its values from generation to generation is through the rituals of that society, and every society has rituals, and the main ritual in any society are meals, when people sit down and eat food together. So this is what I'm pointing at. This is a ritualized behavior. So if I'm sitting down at the table and I'm eating meat, dairy products, and eggs, I'm eating a set of attitudes, a whole constellation of attitudes that are directly connected to social justice issues and the other problems we're having. So I'll talk about a few of those. Number one, we're eating an attitude, this is very obvious, I think, of disconnectedness. The underlying message of every meal essentially is the hidden paradigm is don't make the connection. That's the underlying message. Don't make the connection. What you're eating is a hamburger. What I'm eating is bacon. If my mother, when we had bacon, I was always the first one at the table because I loved all that salt, all that fat, yum, yum, yum. That was really good. I was the first one. We're having bacon, yay. If my mother had told me what bacon was, like the Taoists say, we should call things by their true names, I probably wouldn't have been so enthusiastic, I don't think. If she said, well, what is bacon? She said, oh, it's bacon. Where does it come from? It comes from the store. We don't really know what it is. We're taught to basically disconnect. But if she had said, well, we're eating the flesh of an animal, a pig, who was hyper-confined her entire life, so she couldn't even turn around, and she was literally banging her head against the bars, driven into insanity by this horrible treatment, and then they would steal her babies and all of that. And one day they hung her upside down and they cut her throat and she was bleeding and screaming and we're going to eat her flesh. I would have said, what? I don't want to hear about that. You want me to eat? Come on, Mom. You want me? It was just inconceivable. But the thing is, we don't know what it is until it's a little bit too late. But the underlying idea is that every meal, essentially, when we're eating animal foods, is a ritualized teaching to disconnect, to not make connections. So this has massive repercussions because what is intelligence? Now, the definition of intelligence is the capacity to make relevant connections. That's what it is. If we have an individual or a society that has lost the capacity to make relevant connections, we're in big trouble in terms of intelligence. We're gonna be so obtuse and make just deadly mistakes that will destroy our happiness and our possibilities. So the thing is, we have to understand what animal agriculture is. It's a system of reducing our intelligence. It's a system of reducing our cognitive intelligence, our capacity to make cognitive connections, and our affective intelligence, our ability to emotionally connect. Because the underlying message is don't make it, it's just bacon. So the basic message is don't care, don't look deeply, don't listen deeply, don't feel deeply, don't care deeply. Just trust the authorities. Just stay shallow. Just believe whatever this is what we do. So this is the underlying message, especially when at that age, maybe some of you remember that moment when you learned that this was an animal you're eating, and this darkness that enters our chest is like, oh my God, I'm eating an animal. And most of us probably don't remember that, but I think on some level, okay, I'm just going to stay shallow. And remember, if you're a wealthy elite and you want to have a whole population, a whole society of people that are easily controlled, will pretty much do whatever you tell them to do, buy whatever you advertise to them, believe whatever the news whatever you tell them to believe. Then this is perfect. You want people who are not able to make connections, who are not able to look and listen and feel and connect deeply. So veganism is simply the yearning to make connections. It's this underlying, I think it's our natural yearning to awaken and to evolve and so forth. So when we understand this, I think we can realize that we've been wounded, but we can heal those wounds. I can't heal it in somebody else directly, but I can heal it in the one person I have control over, which is this collection right here of thoughts and feelings and expressing through a body. And the more this one that I have some control over is able to be in harmony with the deeper wisdom and make connections and increase the intelligence, then I think the greater impact we can have in a positive way. So number one is disconnectedness. Number two, essentially, the underlying message of every meal is, essentially, this is directly bears on what we're saying, is the mentality of commodification, the mentality of turning beings into objects. In other words, the lesson in these ritualized meals is that we're not eating a being, we're eating a thing. So this ability to transform beings into things, so that if I see a forest, it's just board feet of lumber. If I see a cow, it's just a hamburger on the hoof. If I see a pig, it's just bacon. That kind of thing. That kind of shutting of our eyes against this being is devastating to these animals. Of course, we do not want to ever think about such a thing happening to us, to receive that kind of hard-hearted look by people who have control over us, who have us completely in their hands, and they don't care at all. There's nothing more horrifying than that, but that's what we do to billions of beings as human beings. And I think we would all agree that if somehow some so-called superior species appeared here on Earth and looked at us like we're just tasty morsels to eat and sold us by the pound, this is the thing that really, when you think about it, how in the heck can we consider ourselves evolved, or I don't know what we consider ourselves, when we are selling beings by the pound, right? Their value is determined by how much they weigh. We live in a society where that's acceptable, where cows and pigs and chickens and fishes and the other animals, their value is determined by how much they weigh. Can you imagine being looked at? Your value is determined by how much you weigh, the sheer materialism of that, the grossest materialism you can ever even imagine. It doesn't get more bizarre and gross than their value is. I'd say, but wait, I can play the piano. Doesn't that count? Or I can paint. I'm pretty good at chess. No. We sell you by the pound. Nothing else matters. We're just going to eat you. We would think that this so-called superior species was incredibly primitive. And what the heck? How can they call themselves superior when they can't even see anything? So this is the woundedness. This is the depravity of this culture that we don't even talk about, that we just allow to go unchallenged. But how is that even possible, really, when you think about it? How can this happen? But that's what's going on every day by the billions. I always say we kill 75 million animals every day for food, and until I realized that's a gross underestimate. But even 75 million animals every day for food, just in the United States alone, is almost inconceivable. The vast dimensions of the huge industrialized killing machine that we have been born into. We didn't create it; it was already going. So, but we've been born into it, and we've been programmed to keep it going. So you have to understand that when we're born into a system, a machine that's killing 75 million animals a day, and we're trained by every institution and every individual in that system to be part of the same system of violence and exploitation of other beings, then it wounds us very deeply, psychologically and spiritually. And we are forced to agree to and to embody these attitudes of disconnectedness, of commodification of life. So again, what veganism is simply, it's no big deal. It's not being any better than anyone else. It's simply coming home to our heart and coming home to our own eyes. Our eyes that see, when we see beings, we see beings. And this is, again, it's nothing to be proud of. It's just our natural eyes. Unfortunately, we've been all wounded on some level where we've learned to, when we see a being, we make some kind of categorization. We put them in a category, and then we say, oh, we don't care about them. So the whole idea is to see that wound and to heal that. So what veganism is essentially, it's yearning and doing the best I can to create a mentality and a way of seeing of radical inclusion, to include not just my group, whatever that is, or my nation, or so forth, but even all human beings and even all living beings. And the more we expand our sphere of concern and caring, the more we create a foundation for peace and harmony in our world, and also, ironically enough, for happiness for ourselves. This is something I think we all know a little bit. Perhaps if you're in this room, you're already pioneers, I think, in this, because that's why you're here. You're leading the way to this, and this experiment, this adventure of expanding the sphere of compassion and to include all living beings. And that's something I think it's really important to understand, is that our life on this planet is an adventure. It's a fantastic adventure that we all have an opportunity for a few years here to contribute to the healing of our world. And I think a lot of times it's easy to forget that, to think, oh my gosh, there's so many troubles here, I don't know what's going to happen, and what's going to happen in the future, are we going to make it? People ask me that, I say, I don't know, but I do know that I've got one day right now. We wake up and every morning we have another day. We never know when we're going to leave our body, right? We never know when that's going to, but it is going to happen. And if we can live very healthy lives and eat really healthy food and eat a lot of sprouts, and maybe if we really do a great job, maybe we get 9 or 10 or maybe even 11 decades. Maybe, the oldest woman in the world, they interviewed her recently, and they said, so what's it like being 118 years old? And she said, it sure went by awfully fast. So that's the thing. Our life goes by quickly. So to just have this feeling, I think, every day that I've got another day and I can do the best I can to be part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. To be part of the solution to living and creating and co-creating really together a more awakened and kind and compassionate and caring situation for us human beings. So it means questioning these attitudes that were injected into us. And even if we're vegan, a lot of people think, well, I'm a vegan now, I'm perfect, I don't have to do anything. Everybody else is the problem, I'm not the problem because I'm vegan, they're the problem, they're not vegan, so I got to change them. And I think I want to question that, because I think it's very important to realize that there's no such thing as a static state of veganism, like now I'm done. It's a never-ending adventure, a journey of awakening and deepening and becoming more capable of embodying what veganism is and being congruent. Because what is veganism? I think the closest word to it, in some ways, is the ancient Sanskrit word ahimsa, which means nonviolence. And basically, nonviolence, another way of saying nonviolence or non-harmfulness, is loving kindness and caring. These words, mercy and tenderness and gentleness and so forth. This basic wisdom is really in the wisdom teachings of the world. It's really very embedded in most of the world religious teachings. And the basic idea is essentially it's whatever I want most for myself, to give that to others. And if I want to be more loved, then to be loving. If I want to have more abundance, then to be generous. As we sow, we reap. As we put out, comes back. The golden rule teaching. It was so great being in China recently, a few months ago, in the city of Chufu, which is really the main place where Confucianism grew up. It's where Confucius lived. And 500 BC, 500 years before the Common Era, Confucius, one of his analects that he spoke and they wrote down was, "Do not do to others what you would not want to have done to yourself." And this is the foundation, essentially, what we're doing to animals. And how many of you at some point have had a companion animal, like a dog or a cat or something? Right, a lot of you have. So you know exactly what I'm saying. These beings are beings. They're not just an apple or a tomato or a sack of cement or a stone. They're a being with interests, whose interests are to her as important as my interests are to me. And she doesn't want to be locked in a closet and not allowed to leave and live in her own excrement, or these things that we do to cows and pigs and chickens. And so when we understand that, we see that these beings are worthy of our kindness and concern. And yet, we're raised in a culture where that basic understanding is repressed. It's when we make these categories of food animals. So, the underlying idea in all of this is to reconnect with the inner wisdom that's in us, and also with the deep level of the wisdom traditions, and connect with the attitudes that can give rise naturally to social justice, healing in the social justice areas. So those are two. I've named two now. I'm going to name two more: disconnectedness, commodification. The third one is entitlement. The subtext of every meal is that certain beings are inherently superior, other beings are inherently inferior. That's the basic message we're eating. Nobody ever says it. It's just we know it. We know it in our bones. And it's totally fine for the inherently superior beings to dominate, exploit, and oppress however they want the inherently inferior beings, because they're superior. Okay, everyone is eating this. And so if everyone is eating this every day, then we have a very powerful, deep river of programming that's coursing through all of us. Even if we're vegans, it's still there. It explains a lot of why we have quite a few conflicts within the vegan movement, because that programming, even if we go vegan in the outer, what's going vegan? So I'm not going to eat meat, I'm not going to eat dairy, eggs, wool, silk, leather, no rodeos, no circuses, no animal tested products. That's fantastic. I mean, that's wonderful. But the deep attitudes can still be in us. So the whole idea is to root out as best we can, or transform these attitudes. And the attitude of entitlement or superiority and so forth is very deeply embedded in us, in our society, because we're humans and they're animals, and we're above the earth, and we sit on chairs, we don't sit on the ground. And I mean, it's in Western culture, in the language, in the syntax, in everything. It's so interwoven. Yeah, because of the herding culture we're raised in, and the language and the structures, the social structures, the expressions in our verbal and in linguistics and everything. So it's really important to be mindful of our thoughts and our feelings and our attitudes and the inner voices that are happening. That's why meditation is so important, so we can get clarity about who we are and realize that what we are has been, in many ways, I realized this when I was in a Zen monk in Korea, after doing thousands of hours of just sitting in silence. It's kind of like this awareness that my mind had been colonized. Really, that's the feeling. It's like I was born, and at a certain point there can be a realization that our consciousness, essentially, I think this is really true of all of us, is essentially like the sky, in the sense that it's infinite, eternal, and clear, and luminous. And it's self-existing, essentially. And yet, when that sky gets covered over with thick clouds and all kinds of who knows what, smog and fog and smoke and everything else, then it's like you don't even see the sky anymore. And that's what I felt like I realized this had happened. Is like I had been born, and then this cultural program is so relentless, and it had just completely covered over my consciousness. But at a certain point, I think if we're quiet enough, with enough one-pointedness, we can suddenly see that behind all that, there's this infinite sky. And the beauty is that the sky of our true nature is never damaged by the clouds. Just like the sky is never damaged by the clouds, the sky is beyond, it's in a whole different dimension than the clouds. And so when we can get a sense of that, a glimpse of the sky-like nature of our mind, we can see that that's true of everyone. Even people that we disagree with, people that are eating animal foods or whatever, we all have the same true nature. And we've all been wounded. And so when we see other people who have been wounded and they're still eating animal foods, then there's no point in criticizing them, blaming them, shaming them, that kind of thing. When someone is wounded, you don't want to kick them, you want to love them, right? Heal them, help them heal. And we can talk about how we can do that, but the basic idea is to use our capacity to speak our own truth with love and respect, because that's essentially what veganism is at its core. It's love and respect for all expressions of life. So veganism essentially is a yearning to get out, to somehow heal all three of these that I've mentioned so far: disconnectedness and commodification and entitlement, and not have a position of privilege or elitism as best we can to look beyond the outer surfaces of appearances of race and gender and species and all these things, and see the light, see the being, see the infinite sky that's present, and love and respect that in all expressions of life. That there isn't any hierarchy, essentially, that we can connect on a deep level and see the interconnectedness of all life. And when we do that, and I think in order to do that, we need to really do it within ourselves. And as we do that, we create a healing in our society that can expand. We can create communities of kindness and caring. The final one I'm going to mention, there's really quite a few more, but in interest of time, I'll just mention this fourth one. The fourth attitude that we it really, unfortunately, it's sort of like it's injected into us with every meal by every institution in our society also, is the mentality of the domination of the feminine. And that's very important to understand, because animal agriculture, like I said earlier, is not just about killing animals, it's about impregnating them against their will and stealing their babies. So what that means essentially is that it's breaking the bond between the mother and her offspring. And I think this, in some ways, could be seen as the original sin of our society, the really core thing. I think we all know in our bones, if there's something we should respect and not mess with, it's mothers giving birth to babies and then nursing those babies and loving and nesting and nurturing and caring for those babies. But animal agriculture does not allow us to do that. If we're going to own animals for food, we need to impregnate them as often as possible, and you see this. I mean, I remember being on organic dairies. I mean, as soon as the mother cow, the cow gives birth to a baby after a 9-month gestation, she wants nothing more than to love and nurture and nurse her little baby. That's never going to happen. That's not your baby. That's my baby. I own you. I own your cow. You're a calf. And I'm going to steal your baby and kill your baby, and I'm going to impregnate you again on the rape rack. And when you're giving birth to another baby, I'm going to take that baby and kill that baby too. And then eventually, after a few times of that, I'm going to kill you too. So this is the basic mentality. It's almost inconceivably violent that we see these beings as mere breeding machines, and we steal everything from them without any compunction. We steal their babies, we steal their time, we steal their lives, we steal their purposes. We steal everything. And this does not go unpunished, in a sense. I mean, there are ramifications to this. There are repercussions to this, and it's the fact that we can't make connections, so we don't see it. We don't talk about it. This should be headlines in every newspaper. It's completely covered. It's invisible. Until the World Peace Diet came out, this was completely undiscussed territory, because what we do to animals, we do to each other. And the problems that we have, it's so interesting, the problems that we have in the human world, all of them we're inflicting on animals. And it comes back to us, and we like, gosh, how can we try to get our scientists to solve the problem, or governmental officials to solve the problem that we're inflicting on animals. For example, when we have, look at the health problems, for example. We have a rise in obesity. I mean, every year it goes up. There's never a year when obesity doesn't increase. And no matter how we do public education, we do this, we do that, it never works. Okay, what are we doing to animals? We have whole armies of scientists. That's all they're paid to do, is to figure out lighting schedules and hormonal additives and feed additives and breeding. To do what? To make animals as fat as possible, as quickly as possible. That's the whole goal of animal agriculture. Why? Because we're selling these animals by the pound. We want them fat as possible, as quickly as possible. So chickens, I mean, we're just 10 years ago, chickens were fat at the age of 45 days. Now it's down to like 38 days. I mean, they're like, if they can fatten them up faster, up to make them balloon. And so we sow seeds of obesity in billions of animals. How are we not going to get obese ourselves? I mean, as you sow, so shall you reap. And that's true for virtually all of the diseases that are afflicting us on every level. The osteoporosis, for example, all these poor cows that have osteoporosis. Why do they have osteoporosis? Because they're forced to overproduce milk, which sucks calcium and magnesium out of their bones. And so these poor downed cows, they can't even walk because their bones break, and they have to be pushed and lifted on forklifts, and all this horrible violence to these poor cows because they have severe osteoporosis. And so we inflict that on these animals, and we get an epidemic of osteoporosis. And cancer is another one. These animals are all cancer is rampant because they're living in filth and they're eating toxic food and all kinds of chemicals. There's over 10,000 different chemicals approved and hormones and antibiotics to be used on these poor animals. So they're full of cancer. And of course, we sow it in them. What do? We get the cancer epidemic. It's a big business. $200 billion a year in the cancer industry. Makes a lot of money. It's very profitable. It's good for the banks, good for the corporations. So you have to understand this is all good from the point of view of the wealthy elite. But it's not good from the point of view of us. For us, the people, that's why if we're exploiting animals, we are being exploited without fail. Because cows, for example, they would never eat the food we're feeding them. I mean, think about it. You know, cows are designed to eat grass, right? And they're not eating grass. I mean, they eat a little bit of grass, they eat some hay, but for the most part, they're forced to eat grains. And they're not designed to eat grains. I mean, grains are very rich. All the, corn and soy. I mean, they're super rich. Alfalfa. Why do they make them eat grains? Because it fattens them up, makes them give more milk, makes them put on weight, right? Because it's more profitable. So they're being exploited. They're eating, but they don't stop there. They're feeding them meat. Cows eat huge quantities of meat, fish meal, and chicken litter, and slaughterhouse waste in general. So we haven't seen cows trying to catch fish. We know. I don't have to argue with anyone about. Sometimes people say, "Well, humans are designed to eat meat, right?" Yeah, right. So, so are cows designed to eat meat? Oh, no. Well, look, if a cow's raised in this factory farm or animal agriculture operation, 10 generations down, I'm sure the 10th generation is going to say, "Oh yeah, we're designed to eat. My granddaddy, he ate meat. I eat meat too." They're not eating meat because it's in their best interest. The only reason these cows are eating all this meat is because they're being exploited. And that's the same for us. Anyone who's eating meat and dairy and eggs, we are not eating foods we're designed for, and we're being exploited, and we'll pay a lot of money to the military, industrial, meat, medical, pharmaceutical, media, banking complex. That's how it's designed. And so it's not like there's any evil. I'm not into like some evil people. It's just this is what has come through from the beginnings of the herding culture. And so, and not only are we sowing seeds of physical disease, we're sowing seeds of psychological illness in these poor animals. These poor animals are driven into all kinds of psychological states of terrible things. And we find the same things happening to us. In fact, it's so interesting to see that the pharmaceutical industry, for example, which is enormously wealthy and therefore enormously powerful, they get their profits from three main areas of business, right? And two out of the three are not that obvious. One is pretty obvious. One of them that's not very obvious is animal agriculture. These corporations, the large pharmaceutical and chemical corporations, make billions and billions of dollars of profits selling, like I said earlier, 10,000 different chemicals, drugs, hormones to animal agriculture to be put into these poor animals without their permission, mixed into the feed, injected into their bodies. And so that's one gigantic profit sector that's why the pharmaceutical industry does not like veganism at all. That's one reason. The second huge profit sector for the pharmaceutical industry is physical disease for humans, right? So then we humans eat the flesh and secretions of these drugged, abused animals, and we get all the diseases that everybody knows about, right? Animal agriculture is clearly linked with the diseases that are filling up our hospitals, such as heart disease, strokes, breast, prostate, and colon cancer, liver disease, kidney disease, autoimmune diseases of various kinds, dementia, and so forth. So there's a lot of money to be made selling drugs for these physical diseases that people get. But the third sector, which is actually the largest of all three, is what I'm talking about here, which is the drugs that people are required to take, apparently, because of psychological illness. So they have, and think of it, I mean, they have the same, very similar psychological problems that the animals that we're eating have, right? I mean, they have despair and panic and anxiety and depression and chronic pain and insomnia and all these things that we need, that the pharmaceutical industry makes billions of dollars, and we were inflicting it on animals, and it comes back to us. As we sow, we reap, and we break down their families, we find our families breaking down and so forth. So the whole idea is to just realize that we have these animals in our hands. I mean, we do. We're infinitely more powerful than they are, especially with our technology. So we can let them live their lives And then we would be worthy of this beautiful earth. And we would be worthy to live our lives as we're intended to in abundance and harmony here. However, if we decide, no, we're going to torment and crush and destroy them, then we're showing that we're not worthy, unfortunately, to be here. And so I think what we're doing now is we're reaching a critical time in our evolution, how it is, where it's in our generation. In fact, it's like right now, I think in the next 10 or 20 years, when we'll need to make a fundamental shift, a major shift. And we can see it coming from every angle. But this fourth mentality of the domination of the feminine, I think, is critically important, because I refer to in the World Peace Diet the word Sophia, which means wisdom in the ancient Greek language. This wisdom of Sophia is something that is within all of us. I think especially within women, because women give birth to babies and they know this unconditional love. This little baby has been born through them, and even though the baby is nothing but really a lot of trouble, they just love that little baby. You know, they nurture and protect and care for that baby. That bond is so sacred and so powerful. That's a wisdom, that wisdom of Sophia, and that wisdom that extends from that to love the earth and to love our community and to love our family and to treasure the expressions of life here on this beautiful, abundant planet. And so that Sophia is also in men, the yearning to protect and care for life. In animal agriculture society, it's based on suppressing Sophia in every way. When you force little kids to eat the flesh of tortured animals, Sophia has to go down. You can't eat that food. Sophia was going to say, what are you doing? And the same thing is true with animal agricultural practice. We could never keep stealing the babies. We couldn't keep castrating these poor males. We couldn't keep masturbating all these males and getting their sperm and putting on a sperm gun and putting it in a vagina and pulling the trigger. And we couldn't do all that. I mean, there's no way. We couldn't have a whole society based on doing that, paying for that. Because this is where it happens. This is the good news, in a sense, is this is the voting booth. You know, these actual dollars are the ballots that do get counted. I'm not sure about the other ballots anymore. These ballots always get counted, and they do their bidding, right? If I pay for meat, dairy products, and eggs, I'm paying someone somewhere to do what I just said, these horrific acts against animals. So when we're buying the food, that's really when the crime is committed. It's the actual purchase of the food. It's when the blood hits the wall and the poor female gets her baby stolen and all these things. But then the irony is we don't just stop there. We don't just cause this. Then we turn around and we actually eat it. I mean, what are we thinking? And we don't just eat it, we feed it to our children, these innocent children. So it shuts down Sophia, slams it shut. And so when Sophia's shut down, then, you know, who's going to stop corporations from cutting down all the rainforests? Who's going to stop corporations from invading into our children's lives with products that are based on pornography and violence? Sophia would jump up and down and say, stop it, stop it, stop it. You know, what are you doing? These are my kids, this is my earth, you know, stop. When Sophia's shut down, nobody's going to stop anything. You've got people eating animal foods with no Sophia. Who's going to protect this earth? I mean, what is it arising in us if animal agriculture destroys that fundamental nature? Who's going to protect the innocent, the vulnerable? We create, you know, animal agriculture is about creating categories in our minds so we can justify violence. That's the foundation of all social justice issues. Creating categories, as long as you put somebody in a category where you can do violence to them, then that's what we do with cows and pigs and chickens. That's the fundamental thing. That's why veganism is so essential. It's saying, it's going to the very root of the problem and saying, right here, this is it. I am going to move to a plant-based diet for ethical reasons. I am no longer going to pay for, and certainly not going to eat, violence against other living beings. And anyone who does that is healing the world at the deepest possible level, because that's going to the living core of our society, is animal agriculture. And so the more people understand this and just share this message in a way that is inclusive. It's not, again, like I say, it's not in any way being superior. It's just healing the wound enough so that I can make that change and then continue on to make that change. So I think essentially it's about understanding that there are two fundamental powers in our human world. One is the power of the individual. You know, each one of us sitting here looking out of our eyes, There's someone there. There's someone, we know it. There's someone in here. There's an agent with will, with a capacity to make choices, and with yearnings and aspirations and so forth. This being that we are, the individual, we have enormous capacity and power to co-create and work together to build a beautiful world. However, there's another power besides the individual. That's the power of the group, the power of the community, the power of society. This power of the group or the community is also enormously powerful. And so the point is that when we're born here, this individual that we are is profoundly affected by the community that we're raised in. When we leave here and we go out into the world and we see people taking out their wallets and voting for death and destruction, there's only one reason anyone does that. There's only one reason, and that reason is people are following orders. That's the only reason. No one argues this. I've talked about this in Iowa to a bunch of ranchers. They all agree. This is the only reason people eat animal foods. It's because from the time we're little infants, just go to any grocery store and look at the little jars of baby food. You'll see turkey and veal and chicken and cheese and beef. So we're eating these. They're fed to us by very well-meaning people who love us and want us to get plenty of protein. So this program goes so deeply. It's pre-verbal, it's ritualized, it's completely invisible, and so we're programmed to eat animal food. So the power of the community is enormous. And so if we aren't careful, our power as individuals will be completely overridden, and we'll just become products of our community. We'll just be basically automatons with the blinders slapped on, just doing what we've been told to do, taking out our wallet, eating and killing and reproducing, and we're reproducing our culture. But if we just reproduce the culture, that's what the culture wants us to do, just reproduce the culture. It doesn't want anything more. But if we're just reproducing the culture, and the culture is based on not a good foundation, on violence and abuse and war and patriarchal values of exploitation and so forth, we're just reproducing that. So the whole idea is to question every dimension of our cultural programming, question the narrative, especially the food narrative. When we do that, then we begin to infuse into our culture a transformative element that can only come from us as individuals. Then we can help not only ourselves evolve, but we can help our culture evolve. So that means creating alternative communities. Right now, for 2 hours, we have an alternative community right here. We can create a community where we're basically discussing and pondering and encouraging kindness and caring and sanity and interconnectedness. And we'll go back into that larger community where there's not so much of that. But it's because of doing this, and this is happening a lot. I mean, vegan restaurants and so forth, and veg fests and meetup groups and sanctuaries and so forth are all communities based on creating an alternative. So I think this is the thing, is to realize that each one of us as an individual, we have an enormous power to heal ourselves and to elevate our consciousness and our clarity and our ability to live in congruence with our own values. And the second thing we can do is we can somehow create and contribute to alternative communities based on vegan values of inclusion and kindness and respect. And that as we do that, we're contributing to the transformation of our culture. And we don't have to have anger and hatred in all of this. We don't need to. I mean, 10,000 years ago, people in Iraq or in the middle, wherever, over there, thought they need to kill and eat animals for food. I'm not angry at them for that. I mean, I don't know what happened. Maybe, there was a terrible environmental catastrophe and they started owning these animals and eating them and killing them. All right, that's okay. All right. But why are we doing it here, now, when it's utterly, completely obsolete and counterproductive? This is the mystery. I mean, we pride ourselves as being logical and rational. If we were logical and rational, Madeline and I wouldn't have to travel all over the world trying to, tell people, like, what are you doing? Everybody be vegan already, a long time ago. But the thing is, we're not logical and rational. We're basically products of a community, and we don't want to be different. We're afraid. We're very afraid of being different. We're very afraid to go against this deep program that came from our own mothers and fathers and ministers and priests and everybody. So, and doctors. So the whole idea is to make the effort that we can make to transform ourselves and then create other communities based on another value system. Like Buckminster Fuller said, if you don't fight against and try to tear down a system that's destructive and violent, because you'll just hurt yourself, and you won't create an alternative and build that up. And this other one it'll be so obviously obsolete, it'll get abandoned. And it's happening. We can see it happening. I mean, I just read the other day, we were just in Canada, and they're already up to, apparently, according to this recent study in Dalhousie University, 10% of Canadians are now either vegan or vegetarian. This is really very interesting. It's really going up, and I think the same thing, I'm sure, is happening here. There's a tremendous positive change that's happening in terms of the awareness of human beings on this planet to the consequences of animal agriculture for our physical health and for our cultural health and for the environment. So at the deepest level, when we're talking about our cultural health, which is really the focus of the lecture today, social justice, we have to see how that's connected with our own individual psychology and the attitudes that we have as individuals and how they outpicture into our world at large. So animal agriculture undeniably is the foundation. Animal agriculture is devastating to the environmental health. And by the way, environmental health, the devastation to the environment, that contributes enormously to social injustice. It's the people who have less money, essentially, who have less privilege, who are being most harmed by global climate destabilization, by water depletion, by water pollution, by air pollution, by petroleum depletion and the rising cost of petroleum. Everything so everything hurts the people who have less much more than people who have more. And animal agriculture is the most environmentally destructive behavior that human beings engage in by far. There's nothing comes close to animal agriculture in terms of just destroying the planet on every level. We're cutting down rainforests at an acre per second right now. We're not just destroying the rainforest, we're wiping out indigenous communities, we're wiping out habitats, we're wiping out everything. The oceans are being destroyed so severely that oceanographers are saying that by the year 2048, there won't be any fish left, basically, if we continue on the path we're going. So I won't talk any more about it, but just essentially to understand that's harmful. That's a huge social justice issue, environmental devastation. And then secondly, cultural devastation, because even though every year we grow enough food to feed everybody on this planet, we waste it. Most of the food we're growing, we're feeding to the imprisoned animals. So even though we grow enough food every year to feed 10 billion people, 11 billion people, and again, no experts argue this, they all agree, we have 7.5 billion people, and yet we have roughly 1 billion people starving. This is an enormous social justice issue, just that basic fact. So the fact that how does that happen? Essentially, it's because those of us who live in industrialized nations, it's not difficult for us to drive up the price of grain on the world market and feed the grain to our imprisoned cows and pigs and chickens and fishes. But people who live in less industrialized nations of the world do not have high-powered economies, and we have just priced the grain beyond their means, and these people are being forced off their land by large banks and corporations and governmental programs, U.S. governmental programs usually. And so they're pushed into the cities, and so they've lost access to the land, they've lost access to food, they have to buy the food, and they're starving, they're going hungry, and it's well understood that food shortages are the primary driving force behind war and conflict in the world, and food shortages are also a manifestation of rampant injustice. When you have a mother whose babies are in her hands and they're starving, and not far away there's other people who are taking most of the grain and most of the water and most of the petroleum and creating most of the pollution, and that's exactly what Gandhi said. He said there's enough for everyone's need but not for everyone's greed. Animal agriculture and eating animal foods is a manifestation of really the most intense form of greed because it's not necessary. It's very harmful. I've been a vegan for 38 years, and it's just liberating. And in general, I haven't had health insurance in 45 years. Haven't had to essentially go into drugstores or go to these kinds of places because essentially, and it's not just us. In general, vegans have much lower rates of the diseases that are filling up hospitals. So we can be just as healthy or healthier without causing this kind of suffering to animals and to other human beings. Starving people are going hungry because of this system that's wasting the abundance of this earth. How many of you have noticed at some point that the earth is beautiful? Anybody noticed that yet? Yeah, how many of you never raise your hands? Have you? Now, we all know the earth is beautiful, but the earth is also abundant, and I really want to emphasize that. We can easily, and this is such good news, the basic idea is we can feed everyone on this earth on much less land. According to the National Academy of Sciences, it takes 12 times as much land to feed someone eating a standard American diet as someone eating a vegan diet. 12 times. So it's not just twice as much or 3 times as much. Isn't that good news? We can drastically reduce our environmental footprint. We can drastically boost the amount of grain and food we're growing and feed everybody. Can you imagine the great celebration that will break out on planet Earth when everybody is fed, no one's hungry? It's well within it's totally within our grasp. And so we have to understand that animal agriculture not only reduces and devastates the outer world, like the environment and our culture, but even worse, it damages our inner intelligence so that we just don't have any effectiveness in solving these problems. We can't make the connections. We just kind of blunder along and spend most of our money creating bombs and use machines to cut down rainforests. So the whole idea is to realize that animal agriculture is devastating the outer world, but it's devastating the inner world even more. And each one of us can work to heal that. Also, animal agriculture, in terms of our culture, besides causing violence to people who are hungry, also violence to the workers. I mean, some of you have visited these places, these horrible places like farms and stockyards and shipping places and slaughterhouses. But just to see these workers, these workers have the worst, they're like the lowest caste, essentially. They have the worst jobs. Where can you imagine a job all day just stabbing, or just kicking, or just shocking, or just impregnating, or just masturbating? And I mean, but if I take out my wallet and pay for meat, I'm paying people to do work that brings out the worst in them. They have the highest rates of injuries, and unfortunately they have the highest rates of suicide as well, and drug addiction, alcoholism, spousal abuse. So we have to realize that what animal agriculture is, it's nested, ever-expanding webs of trauma inflicted on animals and on wildlife and on workers and on hungry people. And trauma in society is a contraction that is going to come out as racism, as sexism, as ableism. It's this trauma. So what we're doing with veganism is essentially giving love and caring to the very root of the problem, and sending our love as best we can in a practical way by no longer paying for that and contributing to that, and creating alternatives like we had in this room over here, these delicious foods that take so much less land and water and petroleum and so forth. And when we do that, we're part of the solution. And we can all be that. It doesn't mean as vegans we're perfect, right? There are still vegans who are vegan and are still racist or sexist. I mean, that's the whole point. We have to understand that going vegan is not the end. Some people think that. As I mentioned earlier, I'm vegan, so I'm not the problem anymore. It's those people over there, they're the problem. So I really want to encourage all of us. I'm going to stop here because I think I'm done. Okay. So I'll just say, I'm telling you, I have so much I want to say. But I'll just say, the final thing is just this idea that when we move into a vegan way of living, that we see that it goes on, it goes in stages, I think. The first stage is a stage that we're all probably aware of, where we're just beginning, right? We're just learning, and it's a very difficult stage. Beginning stage of veganism is difficult because there's a lot of learning to do, there's a lot of unlearning to do. We have to let go of so many wrong concepts about things, and we have to figure out how to make meals that are healthy and nutritious, and how to respond to people who say, well, you're a vegan, but that's stupid, because if everybody went vegan, cows would take over the earth. So, what do I say now? I didn't think of that. Darn, maybe I should eat a few cows and help out. So that's the beginning stage, and it's really helpful to have a mentor of some kind to help, or a group. That's why the Northwest Veg and all these Dharma Voices for Animals and all these groups are so helpful. The second stage we get to, though, on our journey, our vegan journey, is actually in many ways just as uncomfortable, and sometimes it's even worse. And that's the stage I refer to as the angry vegan stage, where now we are either angry, or we're outraged, or we're frustrated, or we're annoyed most of the time because we're sharing our ideas with people. We've attained this, this kind of nice level where we know how to make delicious and nutritious meals. We know how to answer people's questions about where do you get your protein, where do you get your B12, what about plants have feelings too, and what about the cows that are going to take over the world, and what about the desert island, and all these things. We know all that stuff. Okay, good. But now, they say, well, I like bacon, So we can be annoyed. Some people sort of avoid that angry stage by just getting depressed and sad and traumatized, because who's watching all the YouTube videos of the undercover violence towards animals? Vegans, the people who are actually causing, they don't want to, I want to enjoy my bacon, I'm not going to watch that. So people are, very often vegans are the ones watching this. We think that this is all that's happening, it's terrible. We can get depressed, and really it can be very difficult because we can also feel socially isolated because food is the way we bond with each other, right? So if we're vegans, we're eating, it's like we're from another tribe, you're not in our tribe, you don't eat our food, get out of here. And so this is a difficult stage to be in. Some people avoid that stage by what I refer to as the closet vegan stage, where we just basically don't want to talk about it. Are you a vegan? Not really. Just let me eat my tofu and lettuce and leave me alone. I don't want to talk about this too much. So these are ways that we can sort of, I think, find ourselves perhaps stuck for a while. So I think it's very important to realize that there is another stage, and I think multiple stages beyond the beginning stage and the angry stage, which is, I refer to as the stages of deep veganism, where we are able to get a larger understanding, a deeper understanding of the situation in our society, the history of this, the anthropology, the social psychology of all of this, the nutritional dimension, environmental dimension, and we really get a sense of confidence that we are doing the best we can to be a healing force in the world, and that we're contributing every day to somehow being part of the solution rather than being part of the problem, and that we only have a few years on this earth, and we don't know how it's going to turn out, but we know that for this lifetime we're doing the best we can, so at that time when we leave our body, we will know that we did the best we can to be part of the team that's bringing light and healing to our world, and that this is it. This is what we can do, and we need to really, I think, understand that the main changing power is with ourselves. The whole idea that I need to change the rest of the world. I mean, we can go into panic mode and say, we're not happening fast enough. We got to change everybody, and they're the problem. It's not us. And I think really we need to see that the more we can really deeply transform ourselves, the more effective we'll actually be. And just a few people, I think our whole movement, as we begin to take responsibility for the quality of our own consciousness, we'll create a movement that will be unstoppable. Because we'll attract and we'll be geniuses in the sense of creating messaging. Each one of us, instead of just being, someone just passes out leaflets, and that's okay, but if each one of us becomes a creative center of transformational change based on our own inner transformation, we have a movement that is multidimensional and unstoppable with everyone as a leader. Everyone is a leader. We don't have to have just a few leaders that they can pick off. We can have everyone transform. This is the future. Because the whole idea is if I'm going to try to change someone, they're not going to change. Right? If someone came up to me and that they're better and I'm worse and they're going to change me, they're a vegan, I'm not a vegan, they're going to tell me how I'm wrong and they're right, I'd be fighting them. What do you mean? So we have to see that the more we try to change people, the fewer people are going to change. The irony is if we don't try to change people, if we just use truth power, satyagraha is what Gandhi said, on this truth power, to speak our truth and don't try to change people, then ironically people change. And it comes from within themselves. They're not changing to please us or because they're pressured by us, because they want to. And so I'll just close with this idea. Sometimes people ask me, they say, so what can I say? What's a really good thing to say? And if I only have 30 seconds, I'm in the elevator, how can I plant that seed? We all want that magic phrase. But I think I found it, actually. And it's basically this. In your own way, obviously, but the basic idea is this, because it's the truth. This is satyagraha in action. And these are the words. I'm so grateful, I'm so happy that I discovered that the only reason I was eating animal foods all those years was because I was just following orders. And I realized it wasn't in my best interest, I'm not doing it anymore, and it's fantastic. When we speak that in our own words with kindness and love and respect for another person, we're using truth power. We're just telling our own truth, but it is a truth that will resonate with everyone, because there's no one that's not true for. Everyone we meet who's a pre-vegan is only eating animal foods because they're following orders. And when we say, I was eating animal foods all those years and I realized I was just following orders, and I realized it wasn't in my best interest, so I'm not doing it anymore, and it's great, you have just opened the self door for them. And they will leave. they will leave. But they'll forget the conversation. They won't credit you. That's okay. Because you've just planted a depth charge that will just, because our natural wisdom knows that this is not the right thing to do. We are not here to kill and maim and destroy life. And it's not in our best interest. Everybody knows that they're just following orders. Everybody knows it's not in their best interest. They just need a loving example to show them in a way that doesn't make them wrong and gives them an out. So all of us, if we can just embody this basic message with our lives, that we're so grateful that we escaped this programming and we're creating an alternative, and join the party, basically. Join the movement. And I think this is happening. It is happening. It's important for us, though, to do the inner work. So I'm going to stop right here. Thank you all very much. Much love to you, and I really appreciate everything you're doing. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I love you. Love you. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, so we have, we do have time for a few questions. We are running a little late, but I'd like to let's give a big hand to Madeline. She's going to be joining me here right now. And think if you have a question. We probably have time for 1 or 2 questions. Hello, my dear. Wow, that was great.
Hi. So if you like to get some more kind of inspiration for your vegan kitchen, we have some food preparation, cooked, uncooked, on our website, and it's the World Peace Diet. What? Yes, of course. We have these videos on our website, theworldpeacediet.com. So if you like to browse a little bit. And the second thing, I have 2 baskets for free will donation to keep us up on the road. We're very grateful. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Madeline. Yeah, so I'm happy to answer a few questions. I forgot to mention, I do have on a CD the 4 Viharas, 2 different meditations based on vegan values, the 4 Viharas and one other one, if you'd like to try that. People have said they really love doing these meditations. All right, so does anyone have any question for me? I think we have time for maybe 2, or I said we'd be out of here by 9, so we really are a little bit short of time, but go ahead. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I can hear you.
So you mentioned companion animals.
Yes.
Yes, dogs. What is your perspective on how we should do it? But we can do things.
Okay, great question. The question is about companion animals. What is the best way to relate to them? Yes, I think it's a situation, it's kind of an unfortunate situation, similar to animal agriculture, where we're sort of born into a society where we have these animals that are property that are used as companion animals for us. I'm totally not opposed to people having companion animals if you're rescuing animals from a bad situation, you're giving them a life. I think that's fantastic. However, I'm really opposed to breeders who are breeding these animals to sell them and people buying them, because there's an enormous amount of suffering, and that's very similar to animal agriculture for meat. I also am in favor of vegan, as much as possible, feeding your companion animals vegan food. There's V-Dog. I mean, dogs make pretty easy vegans. Cats, according to Evolution, there's a food called Evolution you can buy online. They make dog food and cat food that's totally plant-based. And according to Eric Wiseman, I think his name is, who's the founder of Evolution, he says that 2/3 of cats will thrive on a vegan diet. So I think it's good to do the best you can to minimize suffering in these situations. And if you feel called to have a companion animal. But I think in the long run, the whole idea is to stop stealing the sovereignty of other beings. Let them live their lives freely, and that's where we're going. I think that's the doorway for us, the vegan doorway, and everything we can do to move in that direction, I think, is helpful. Each one of us in our own way to do that. Thank you. That's a great question. Okay, maybe one more. Okay, yes, sir. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that powerful message.
Yes.
I've been a vegetarian, almost vegetarian for a long time, and last year I got more involved with this Northwest veg. One of the questions that I'm still contending with is where do I draw the line? Because most life depends on other lives, except perhaps on GMOs. So where do you draw the line?
Where do you draw the line is the question. Yeah, okay, so that's a fair question. I think basically we just do the best we can in the situation. The definition of veganism by Donald Watson in 1944 was, he said, veganism is a philosophy and way of life which seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. So as far as possible and practicable. So essentially, all of us can thrive. This is the great gift, and this is the main point, is that all of us have been given a wonderful gift of a physical body that does not require any animals to suffer to get all the nutrients that we need to celebrate our lives here and be healthy. So the thing is, we've been born into a culture where we've been forced to eat animal foods, and so we've given away that gift. So reclaim that gift, stop taking out our wallets and paying for any foods that come from animal origin, and we can all do that. That's dairy products, eggs, any kind of flesh, fish, anything, honey, anything that comes from oppressing animals. And as much as possible, I would say also, while we're at it, to go organic, because pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides are destroying bees and birds and butterflies and ecosystems. And as much as possible, a whole foods plant-based diet, organic whole foods, because again, the artificial flavorings and colorings and additives, those are toxic really to us. And if we eat them, they go through us in our urine and feces and go right back into the ecosystems again. And if we get sick because of that and we're taking drugs, that also goes through us and goes back into the ecosystem. So it's much better to be healthy. It's much better not to buy anything with chemicals and other products. I would say also, we visit a lot of vegan people and stay in their houses and stuff, and I'm still kind of disappointed sometimes to see all these really kind of products tested on animals and a lot of chemical personal care products. People are putting on their skin all these chemicals. People are using in their kitchens lots of toxic chemicals. So really, as much as we can, try to minimize the amount of toxic chemicals we're buying and using. And also think of fair trade is very important, not to buy products that have any kind of slavery for human beings as much as possible. Buy clothes in a thrift store or somehow organic that's with fair trade labor and so forth. I think these are all lines that we can draw, because veganism is about compassion for animals, including not just non-human animals, but human animals as well. And I would say also, as much as possible, veganic agriculture. We're moving in that direction. So in other words, we don't need to have manure and bone meal and blood meal and these animal additives into the agriculture. So as much as we can, grow food ourselves, or create maybe community agriculture, our friends at farmers markets and so forth, and support them. And again, moving in this direction, it's a wonderful adventure we're on. And then in terms of other interactions with animals, again, just as much as we can to give them respect. Do not see animals as pests, right? As soon as we see animals as pests, it's like, we're the ones probably the pest, actually. So try to take them outside and not kill them if they're spiders or whatever. Just to do the best we can. There's many different individual situations, but to always do the best we can to draw the line on the side of kindness and caring and inclusion for other beings, for animals and human animals. That's it. I mean, we live in a culture with massive violence and abuse of animals and human animals, and so that means each one of us is going to do the best we can. There's some people, obviously, there's no point in competing on this in the sense, or judging or blaming each other, but each one of us do the best we can, and as much as we can be an example of that. So hopefully that's helpful. All right, so I think last question. I really can't take more. My wife, Madeline's probably already saying we really got to go, but okay, one last one, yeah.
Your opinion about lab-grown meat?
Yeah, lab-grown meat, I think, is definitely on the way. Whether you like it or not, it's going to be coming. So there's like millions of dollars of investment into this at this point. So it's going to be coming. And I actually think, in a sense, that it could be a help, in the sense that even though right now we have these amazing sort of plant-based meats that are very similar in many ways to the sort of quote-unquote real thing, if we have lab-grown meats, that could help perhaps be a segue for people to move away from taking out their wallet and paying for imprisoning and all the horror that we inflict on animals. So I'm really not happy if they're going to be using like bovine growth serum in order to keep this process alive. They've been using a lot of that, so they really should be plant-based. I mean, maybe if you use a little bit of starter or some kind of thing, but then have them be completely plant-based. I don't think they're going to be that healthy, so I don't think we should eat it myself. I would never eat it, but if it can help people to wean them away from the violence of animal agriculture, I think it's a good idea. And I really think that in the future, maybe not that far away, that meat eating and dairy eating will be seen more and more as really sort of an antisocial behavior, kind of like we have a special room for smokers, have the same thing for meat eaters and something. It's kind of like, if they really want to do it, but come on, everybody. So I think we're moving in that direction. We're still in the very beginning, but essentially, I think there will be a whole lot of different breakthroughs in the level of education, the levels perhaps of like the technology you're talking about, media. We really need to do something about the media. Facebook has just banned Cowspiracy, for example. I mean, it's really getting ridiculous, but yeah. So, censorship is coming down hard. So we have to get together at the Unitarian Church and talk about this stuff, or they can't stop us. But I think, grassroots activism, grassroots working together and creating our own ways of communicating and sharing the message is really the most powerful way. And that's what we see when we travel around the world. There's no substitute for this kind of grassroots activism. So I'm just going to close here. I want to say I really appreciate all of you, the efforts that you're making. I know that each and every one of you is a center for a transformation of our society. And you're doing wonderful things, and I can't wait to continue to work together with you in various ways. Feel free to stay in touch with Madeline and me through our website, worldpeacediet.com. In any way, we have a tour schedule there. We have a training in the World Peace Diet you can take if you'd like, and lots of people have gone through that, including Kip Anderson, who created Cowspiracy, and a lot of other people. So I think together we can make a positive difference. And I'll just close with this very short poem by Shel Silverstein, who some of you know who he is. He passed away recently, a little while back, but he wrote a poem called Point of View, which I think does a great job in kind of giving a little bit of the message in a succinct way, and it goes like this. Thanksgiving dinners, sad and thankless, Christmas dinners, dark and blue, when you stop and try to see it from a turkey's point of view. Sunday dinner isn't sunny, Easter feasts are just bad luck, when you stop and try to see it as a chicken or a duck. Oh, how I once loved tuna salad, steak and lobster, lamb chops too, till I stopped and looked at dinner from the dinner's point of view. And I think the wisdom in that poem really revolves around that word stopped, until I stopped. We're all being propelled along, we have busy lives and so forth, and when we leave here, that's what people are going to say, I don't have time for all this. But if we can somehow stop for a moment and get outside of the prison of our cultural programming and look at a deep level at how the interconnectedness of social justice issues, environmental issues, health issues, psychological, spiritual, ethical issues all come out of animal agriculture. When we get out of the cultural narrative and can see from the bigger picture and make a transformation in our own lives, we can create the foundation of a world where peace and freedom and justice are possible. And there is a pathway opening to a doorway that's behind that door. There's a beautiful world for us ahead. I don't know all the doors beyond that first doorway, but the first doorway is veganism. That's the one that's beckoning. That's the one we can all do. When we go through that one together, there'll be other doorways to deal with capitalism and all these other things. But veganism, we've got to get that one. That's available, it's present, and we can all do it. And when we do that, our intelligence, our understanding, our compassion will begin to be reborn in us. And this is what I think is happening. Sophia is resurrecting. The sacred feminine is resurrecting as this movement, and it embraces all the movements. It's a totally embracing movement to question the official narratives, question the trusted voices, connect with our own intuition. That's the key. And then together we can each one of us present our unique piece of the puzzle and put it together. So thank you very much. Much love to you all. Let's go forth and multiply the message. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I'm happy to sign books if you like, or CDs. And I'm sorry I didn't have time to play the piano. I was going to do that. But oh well. Much love. Thanks.